Imagine walking into a hospital emergency room with a bone sticking out of your arm, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah, not a great start to the day.
No, definitely not. And instead of taking an x-ray or, getting you a cast, the doctor just looks at you and tells you to fix your personality.
Just have a better attitude and that bone will snap right back into place.
Exactly. Because for most of us, medical diagnoses carry this expectation of mechanical precision. You break a bone, the doctor points to a jagged white line on a screen, and the physical cause of your pain is just undeniable. We are completely conditioned to look for tangible, physical culprits when our bodies fail us.
Right. I mean, we want a virus we can look at under a microscope or maybe a genetic marker we can sequence. Seeking a physical cause for a physical problem is really the foundation of modern medicine, mostly because it offers a clear, actionable path to a cure.
Right. Well, today, for you, our ever-curious listener, we are exploring a framework that basically throws that microscope entirely out the window.
Out the window and down the block.
Yeah. We're doing a deep dive into a highly provocative, just entirely unconventional text
Yeah.
from September 2020. It's by an author named Su Feng. It was translated by Yu and edited by Kair. The document is titled The Relationship Between Consciousness and Disease.
And it is quite a read.
It really is.
Yeah.
It argues a singular radical thesis, which is basically if someone gets ill, something is absolutely wrong with their consciousness. Now, before we wade into this, I really need to make our mission here incredibly clear.
Yes, very important disclaimer coming up.
The views presented in this source material are highly controversial. They run completely counter to established medical science. So our deep dive today is strictly an impartial exploration of the author's philosophical arguments. We are here to dissect the architecture of this specific worldview, not to endorse it in any way.
What's fascinating here is how the text attempts to build this really comprehensive logical bridge between abstract mental states and tangible physical ailments. You know, the author isn't simply regurgitating the power of positive thinking.
Right, it's way beyond just good vibes.
Exactly. He is attempting to construct a universal law of biology, one that scales from the macro level of global environmental sanitation all the way down to the micro level of cellular mutation. He wants to prove that human consciousness is the singular architect of our physical reality.
And he actually begins building that argument by looking at a map contrasting two entire nations. He uses Bangladesh, describing it as dirty, disorderly, and poor. And he places it alongside Switzerland, which the text describes as pristine, orderly, and wealthy.
Which is a pretty stark comparison to start with.
It is. But he sets up this dichotomy not to talk about global economics or geopolitics. He does it to introduce his concept of an environmental mirror.
Yeah, he asks a really pointed question about those two nations. He asks, were the mountains, rivers, and streets in Bangladesh originally filthy from the dawn of time, and those in Switzerland inherently pristine?
And obviously he concludes they were not.
Right. So by stripping away geographical and historical variables, the author kind of forces the reader to look at the people inhabiting the land. He asserts that the Swiss possess a collective consciousness that highly values environmental sanitation.
So their physical reality reflects that order.
Exactly. Conversely, he claims the people of Bangladesh lack that specific collective consciousness regarding sanitation, which supposedly manifests as a disorderly environment.
So he takes that massive macro concept and scales it right down to the micro level of a single neighborhood. He asks you to visualize two identical houses sitting side by side on the exact same street.
Okay.
One family's home is just spotless, completely free of pests. But the house next door is filthy. It's swarming with flies and mosquitoes.
And he says you can't blame money for this, right?
Exactly. The author insists that if you want to understand the root cause of this disparity, looking at the family's income brackets, their education levels, or their jobs, that will just give you the wrong answer.
Because in his framework, the condition of the house is dictated entirely by the mental state of the inhabitants.
Yes. The physical space is a direct, unavoidable manifestation of the family's collective mind. Basically, if the consciousness is messy, the living room is messy.
Which sets up his massive logical leap regarding human health. He establishes that a country is an environment, right? And a house is an environment. Therefore, the human body is simply another environment.
It's just a smaller house.
Precisely. By his logic, if the body becomes dirty, infected, or diseased, the sole culprit is the consciousness managing that fleshy environment. He states without hesitation that the problem does not come from society or viruses or other people. The illness is completely manufactured by the mind.
It is a profound escalation of personal responsibility. I mean, he takes the concept of an environment, the external spaces we inhabit, and just collapses it inward.
It's intense.
Very.
Yeah.
The organs, the bloodstream, the respiratory system, they are all just the house that your consciousness occupies. So if the plumbing in the house breaks down, the tenant is entirely to blame for the malfunction. Okay, let's unpack this, because anyone listening right now is likely raising some serious questions. I mean, wait, isn't this ignoring massive systemic factors like infrastructure, history, and resources?
Well, absolutely.
By blaming the tenant for everything, this framework entirely ignores the real world. Like, what about unequal distribution of global resources? Or simply stepping on a rusty nail? If we look at the house analogy, he ignores the fact that one house might just be built next to an open sewer.
Right, the external factors are just deleted from the equation.
To put it in modern terms, it feels like the author is essentially arguing that if your smartphone screen is cracked, it's because the software has a bad attitude, completely ignoring the fact that you might have just dropped it on the sidewalk.
That's a great analogy, that the author is entirely rejecting the existence of the concrete sidewalk.
Really just ignoring gravity.
Basically, yes. In his worldview, the software, your consciousness, is so immensely powerful that it dictates the physical integrity of the hardware. To follow your analogy, the author would argue that your consciousness actively orchestrated the dropping of the phone. You didn't just stumble, right? Your mind commanded your hand to let go.
Wow. Okay, so to defend this idea that the mind completely rules the physical domain, the author leans on historical precedent. He cites this famous Chinese idiom, mistaking the shadow of a bow in one's cup for a snake.
I love this story.
It's fascinating. The story centers on a man named Du Xuan, who is having a drink at the home of a local official. And while he's sipping from his cup, Du Xuan saw what looked like a tiny snake floating in the liquid.
Yikes.
Yeah, but he drank it anyway to avoid offending his host. But upon returning home, he was struck by agonizing, just unbearable abdominal pain.
He experienced a profound physical collapse based entirely on a visual misinterpretation.
Right, he became completely bedridden. But days later, he learned there was never actually a snake. The official just had a bow hanging on his wall, and the light in the room cast a shadow of that bow directly into Du Xuan's cup.
Just a trick of the light.
Exactly. And the instant Du Xuan learned the truth, his severe illness vanished. He was completely cured. The author uses this centuries-old fable to declare that the mind clearly creates disease.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is co-opting a very real, well-documented psychological phenomenon, which is the psychosomatic response.
Right, the mind-body connection.
Exactly. We know the brain can generate physical symptoms in response to stress or trauma, but the leap in logic occurs when the author takes an extreme example of the nocebo effect, where negative expectations create negative physical outcomes, and uses it as evidence that all human diseases, without exception, are generated by consciousness.
And he immediately updates the fable for the modern era to try and kind of bulletproof his claim against modern skepticism. He recounts this anecdote of a patient who feels mild discomfort and visits hospital, only to be misdiagnosed with late-stage cancer.
A horrifying situation.
Truly, the patient goes home, loses all hope, and rapidly develops severe debilitating symptoms that mimic advanced cancer. Their family even begins preparing for hospitalization and hospice. But then the hospital calls, realizes there was a mix-up with the charts, and informs the patient they just had a common cold.
And let me guess the reaction.
The bedridden patient jumps up, bursts into laughter, and is fully cured on the spot.
The author deliberately bypasses the complex biology of how intense stress hormones can suppress the immune system. Instead, he treats the mind as a magical toggle switch.
Just flip it on, flip it off.
Right. In his view, the cancer symptoms were not a cascading biological failure triggered by stress. They were a literal manifestation of the mind believing it was dying.
He then points to a physiological reaction that pretty much every listener has experienced: anger. He notes that when a person becomes deeply outraged, their hands tremble, their lips turn purple, and their body might physically shiver.
We've all been there.
Yeah. He challenges the reader to look at their own shaking hands and realize that a mere thought, just a burst of anger, is physically altering their blood flow and nervous system in real time.
He synthesizes these 3 points: the historical fable, the modern misdiagnosis, and the universal physical response to anger, to cement an ironclad rule. He is not suggesting the mind just influences the body's susceptibility to illness.
It's much stronger than that.
Yes. He is declaring that consciousness is the sole biological determinant. If there is a disease, A conscious flaw put it there.
And he takes this theory from the abstract into some deeply personal territory. He dares the reader to conduct an observational study of the chronically sick people in their own lives. Yeah, it gets a bit harsh. He claims that if you analyze their personalities, you will uncover a specific inventory of negative traits. He lists things like pessimism, jealousy, greed, a tendency to gossip, desire to dominate others, or holding on to inner resentments.
He's basically stripping away the biological neutrality of illness
Yeah.
and replacing it with a moral judgment. Under this doctrine, chronic pain is indistinguishable from a chronic personality flaw.
Exactly. And conversely, he claims that people who are incredibly healthy are optimistic, romantic, open-minded, selfless, and love to laugh. The implication is staggering, really. It creates this stark binary where health equals virtue and illness equals a toxic personality.
Which introduces a really dangerous tension regarding how we perceive suffering. It transforms empathy for the sick into an investigation of their moral failings.
Yeah, you start judging the sick person instead of helping them. This brings us to a fascinating nuance in the text regarding people who fake being sick. We're all familiar with this behavior, right?
Oh, sure. Plain hooky.
Right. A student fakes a fever to avoid an exam, or an employee fakes a migraine to dodge a toxic meeting. The author also notes people sometimes feign illness to garner sympathy or to, manipulate someone else.
But the author issues a severe warning here. He argues that the very act of pretending to be sick is a symptom of a diseased mind. And the mechanism he proposes is deeply unsettling.
What does he say happens?
He claims that feigning illness frequently enough trains the consciousness to desire that state. So eventually, the mind will force the physical body to actually manifest the exact disease the person was only pretending to have.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he dives deep into the mechanics of the literal subconscious. The author argues that our subconscious minds cannot process nuance, context, or sarcasm at all.
It just takes everything at face value.
Exactly. It takes our deepest desires and executes them with terrifying precision. He gives a highly relatable example. Say someone is exhausted from work, just totally burned out, and mutters, "I really want to lie in bed and have some teeming rest."
A completely rational expression of fatigue. I've said that myself.
We all have. Yet the author says your subconscious hears that as a literal, absolute command. It doesn't care about your job or your responsibilities. It only cares about putting you in that bed. And it will mobilize physical events in the real world to achieve that goal.
Like what kind of events?
Well, the subconscious might orchestrate a twisted ankle. It might arrange for a car accident or cause you to slip while chopping vegetables and slice your finger.
Wow. So the mechanism the author is implying here completely bridges the gap between thought and physics. He suggests that a repressed desire for rest creates a deliberate lapse in physical coordination.
It's not an accident at all.
Right. What we call an accident, tripping on a stair, looking away while driving, is actually the subconscious seizing the steering wheel to force the body into a state of recovery, regardless of the physical damage required to get there.
The author views the subconscious like an overzealous smart home assistant. You walk into your house, sigh, and say, "Hey, I'm too exhausted to cook dinner tonight." So the smart home assistant immediately locks the doors, turns on the gas, and burns down your kitchen to ensure you don't have to cook.
That is terrifying.
It solves your problem in the most destructive, literal way possible just to fulfill the request. You essentially have to constantly police your inner monologue so you don't accidentally order a catastrophe.
That analogy perfectly captures the psychological burden this philosophy places on an individual. You are no longer just responsible for your actions, you are terrified of your own passing thoughts. The idea that a moment of fatigue could biologically orchestrate a fractured bone speaks to the immense, almost tyrannical power the author assigns to the subconscious mind.
Right, and it is at this late stage in the text that the author finally pulls back the curtain on the specific spiritual roadmap driving all of these claims. He reveals this is not merely a philosophical essay on wellness, it is actually doctrine. He introduces something called Lifechanyuan values.
And this context is absolutely vital.
Right.
The author isn't just a casual observer of health. He is laying out the foundation for a very specific religious and spiritual community. He refers to this community as the new oasis for life.
And one of the core tenets of this Lifechanyuan doctrine is jarringly explicit. It states, quote, "Living in the new oasis for life, one is not allowed to fall ill."
Not allowed.
Not allowed. Getting sick is not viewed as an unfortunate biological event. It is a direct violation of the community's rules.
When illness is literally banned, The pressure to maintain perfect health becomes a matter of spiritual compliance.
Wow.
If you manifest symptoms, you are threatening the utopian vision of the entire community.
Exactly. And if a follower does break protocol and get sick, the author has a very specific interrogation ready for them. He demands to know if they have been following the spiritual roadmap.
What kind of questions does he ask?
He asks if they have reflected. Have they recited their daily prayers as a Lifechanyuan celestial? Have they pulled the poisonous weeds from their soul garden? Have they been selfless?
Okay, standard spiritual fare so far.
Right. But nestled among these predictable spiritual questions is one that completely stopped me in my tracks. He asks the sick person, I have asked you to frequently participate in flirting. Has you done so? Flirting.
It is an incredibly unexpected metric for spiritual and physical health, but it actually aligns with his earlier assertion about the personalities of healthy people.
The idea that healthy people are optimistic and romantic.
Right, precisely. In this doctrine, joy, romance, and flirting are not just pleasant social interactions, they are prescribed energetic frequencies. The author views these actions as active medicinal practices that are necessary to maintain a healthy consciousness and repel disease.
This raises an important question about the author's role and his tone toward the people he is supposedly guiding. If a person is suffering from a disease, and that disease is deemed a failure to pray, or a failure to be selfless, or a failure to flirt enough, how does the author treat them?
I'm guessing not with a warm cup of soup.
Definitely not. He is unapologetically severe. He writes, I am sorry that not only do I fail to comfort the sick, but I even sprinkle salt on their wounds.
Wow. He actively embraces the cruelty by claiming the mantle of the ultimate truth-teller. In his view, comforting a sick person would be validating the very flawed consciousness that created the illness. He believes the only way to cure the body is to ruthlessly attack the mental weakness that caused it, even if that means adding emotional pain to their physical suffering.
Any logical person listening to us unpack this text has to be screaming one massive pushback question right now. What about babies?
Right, the ultimate exception.
Yeah. What about a child born with a severe, debilitating congenital disease? A newborn infant cannot possibly have a flawed personality, a tendency to gossip, or a subconscious desire to orchestrate a car accident to get some rest.
Congenital illness is the ultimate stress test for his theory of biological determinism. If consciousness creates all disease during a person's lifetime, the author has to explain a disease that exists at the exact moment life begins before the brain is even fully formed.
The author clearly recognizes this gaping logical hole, so he carves out one single, massive exception to his rule. He addresses congenital diseases, illnesses brought from the mother's womb, and written directly into the genetic sequence.
And how does he explain that?
To explain this away, he completely abandons the current lifetime and leans heavily into the concept of karma and reincarnation.
It is the only patch that can fix his logic, really. He argues that the genetic sequence was encoded by the consciousness of the individual in their previous life.
He states that the disease is the unavoidable karmic debt from a past existence. So even in the case of an innocent newborn, the ultimate blame is still placed squarely on the individual's consciousness. It's just an older version of it that they can't even remember.
That's incredibly bleak.
It is. And his advice for people suffering from these genetic past life diseases is staggering in its lack of empathy. He says they simply have to bite their bullets and bear them.
That phrase alone solidifies the uncompromising, punishing nature of his doctrine. There is no grace for the genetic lottery. If you are born sick, you earned it in another life, and you must suffer through it in this one.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from the clean streets of Switzerland to the shadow of a snake in a cup, through the literalism of the subconscious mind, all the way to past life karma.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. The author claims his ultimate goal is to help humanity say goodbye to diseases forever. His prescription is to do good deeds, accumulate merit, and strictly follow his Lifechanyuan roadmap to a heaven where no one is ever sick. While this text is rooted in a highly specific and frankly severe theology, it exposes something deeply universal about human nature.
Yeah, it lays bare our profound desperation to exert control over the random, terrifying nature of biological illness.
Exactly. Sickness is terrifying precisely because it strikes without warning. A virus or a mutating cell doesn't care if you're a good person, if you pay your taxes, or if you pull the weeds from your soul garden.
It's just biology.
Right. This text, despite its harsh victim blaming, is a desperate attempt to impose order on that terrifying chaos. It offers an intoxicating promise: if you can achieve perfect mental purity, you become physically invincible.
It is a very seductive illusion of control. But that illusion carries a devastating cost, which really brings us back to the hospital waiting room we discussed at the very beginning. The physical X-ray of a broken arm offers a diagnosis free of moral judgment. This text shatters that machine and replaces it with a relentless audit of the soul,
Right.
which raises an important question, something that echoes far beyond the boundaries of this specific essay, and it is what I want to leave you to chew on today.
Hmm.
If we choose to believe that absolute physical health is merely a reflection of moral purity and a perfectly managed consciousness, does that framework truly empower us by handing over total control of our bodies? Or does it inevitably engineer a profoundly cruel society, one where we look at the sick, the vulnerable, and the suffering, and confidently tell them that their pain is entirely their own fault?
A heavy, essential thought to leave you with as we navigate how we treat ourselves and the people around us when the body inevitably fails. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.